Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So, I wanted to talk today about escorts. And since we have so many of our youths joining that industry, I wanted to bring up how escorts are not a safe investment long term. Not even in the short term, but sometimes you will get an escort who is quite beautiful. She's a talker. She really knows her way around a man's mind, and she can use her femininity in a way that's a weapon and get past a man's safeguard. And so I have some notes here that I want to share with you to kind of open up the conversation. And one of them is a woman who can disassociate during intimacy and disassociate in her heart. Well, now she can disassociate from you. It's just disassociation upon disassociation. Because with trauma, her mind is never really at peace. She's really tormented underneath the surface. Because she has to have this facade in order to keep the customers coming. I want you to think of the scene where Rosalie, I forget her name, but it's a redhead hooker in Game of Thrones. And she works for Peter Baelish, and she's sad that one of the Joffrey's bastards was eliminated because one of the women slept with Robert Baratheon. And she's crying and she's sad. And Littlefinger kind of puts her in her place. It's just like, you're not going to make me money if you're out here crying, basically, right? So, because one of the customers complained she started crying and wasn't acting like herself. And you can argue that everyone has an off day at work and that you'd have to get to work. But when you have to let strange men mount you and you're mentally sad, well, that's a lot different than being sad and saying your total is going to be 25 cents or, or whatever. Like, you see what I'm saying? If you're working as a cashier, you're doing banking, it's a lot more autonomous, so you can just become an automaton. But when you're working in a field that requires human touch, and you have to have a certain energy in order to make the most and get the most tips, well, being sad isn't something that you can let get in the way, and so you have to turn off your emotions. A lot of those women call it being unbothered. Now, I can be a bit unbothered just because I'm more stoic, and I think that after a certain amount of bad experiences in life in general, you become not hard of heart, because we're not supposed to have hard hearts, but you get a bit thicker skin. You're able to withstand more negativity and absurdity and trial when it's thrown your way by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But an escort, no matter how pretty she is drama and trauma, and she's really not somebody who can let go of all the things she's done. A lot of those women have to run away from their own thoughts. And if she's relishing in those thoughts that she had, those escapades that she had, you really have to be mindful, because that's a very Ishtar personality. Someone who, once you reject her, when she was never rejected before, can go absolutely off the walls. And if you haven't read the Epic of Gilgamesh and see how Ishtar is, well, you should. What's fascinating is the ancients had a very interesting way of describing, negative sides of female behavior, and positive sides as well. And an escort is not a safe investment because she risked her health for money. That's someone who worships the dollar, the almighty dollar, the pound, whatever currency, you get the point. Now, they can have the Botox, they could have had hundreds of thousands of plastic surgery, and when you have children, they might not even look like their mom because she's a totally created being, like a manicured entity from a plastic surgeon. And if you don't believe me, just look up before and after some of these plastic surgeries and you'll be like, wow. And that stuff doesn't go down to the DNA, that's surface level. So you're actually liking something that's a bit of an illusion. And so I want you to know that when they say get the bag, have a roster of men, rotate men, you need to have a sugar daddy, this is, and they all talk about not really trusting men, disassociating themselves, alienating themselves from their own selves. It's almost like if you read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, you kind of get what I'm going at. My mom was an escort, and when you do it for so many years, you have to shut off parts of you. And when you try to open that up again, it's like all the sin just pours out, and it's like this smoke, and it's flashing all of these things at you that you did, in your mind, you remember, and then you have to, okay, get it out, and then you need to distract the mind, and that's where you get intoxicants, which erode your health and make you even more crazy, and deteriorate your beauty, and then when you look in the mirror, you really hate what you see, because the filth that was internal is now really coming out, like, it reminds me of those zombies in The Last of Us, where it's like those mushrooms, things are just growing out of you. The putridness can be masked for a while. Like, someone could have an open flesh wound that's rotting, and you could put some shiny armor on in front of it with some nice, detailed, carvings in there or whatever. But then you're like, oh, that person looks strong. And then you pull off that armor, and you're like, oh, you're actually dying inside. That's what an escort is. And it isn't a healthy way to live. And they may be very smart in their survival technique, because I think that type of work was a way of survival for a while. But now, in the modern age, where there's so many different types of jobs, and women still choose that, I'd argue that that's because their soul wants it. And that's a darkness in them. Why do they want strange men to use them and throw them away? But they think in their head they're the one dominating the situation. Like, oh, I'm the prize. They're coming to me, but they're leaving. And this is something that causes like a mental fracturing of your brain. Like, you're just splitting against yourself. Who are you? They have to be a different person with each customer and then navigate his energy. And then it becomes even weirder when you have one guy who you've fully broken in keep coming back, and then she doesn't really respect him, because it's almost like she knows, I've used you, here you are coming back to me. I mean, the person who kicks a dog and it just keeps coming back, you don't really respect that dog. But if you kick a dog and it tries to bite your foot, you stop. And the mental abuse that an escort can do to a man is strange, and they know how to evoke this type of energy that suits the very nastiness and depravity of a lot of finance bros, a lot of rich men. They have opened up their own sins as well. So when you have wealthy men who use their wealth in a bad way by buying escorts, these two negative energies coming together creates a lot of wickedness in the world, spreads sexual corruption throughout the land. And this isn't a safe environment for children, and it's not conducive to marriage and long-term relationships. And marriages build society, and fatherless homes cause problems, and motherless children suffer. So when you think of Adam and Hawa, Eve, may Allah be pleased with them both, them being there, and that is remarkable. It's truly remarkable, because you wonder about how she was, how she behaved, and how he behaved. And you just keep going back to the prophets and the messengers and looking at how they lived. And further, I think the drive for escorts is just men's desire for polygamy. And if more women accepted halal polygamy and they were fine with it, I think escorts would lose their monopoly, because monogamy is difficult on some men, and we have to be honest with that, and it's not disgusting. A lot of people think it's disgusting, but then the atheists will say, no, you can go to the Playboy Mansion and pay to, have a round of 10 women in a week, but if you marry them, that's when it becomes disgusting. And so the oddness of American culture is that a woman will divorce really easy, and then she'll have children, and stepfathers having to take up the financial burden, and the spiritual burden of guiding another man's child, is a lot of pressure. And if you're a young man and you're gonna marry a woman who has 3 kids, and she's too old now to really maybe try to have another, and she's already over having kids, your lineage ends and his continues. And then if she doesn't remarry, she's usually sucked in poverty. The kids are at daycare, they're being raised by strangers, they don't get to have a mom and dad experience. Earth is full of trials, no doubt, but if polygamy was practiced and more women accepted middle-class men, and women were raised to the honorable position of wives, they wouldn't need to do escorting. And when women confront the raw reality that men really are like those lions and roosters, because they can make babies for so long, whereas we women cannot. And so that drive to produce helps us stay alive as human species, and our gift of beauty is only a temporary loan. I made a video about this not too long ago, the loan of beauty. It's to help us to attract a mate, and once we start to lose our beauty, then you begin to see the necessity of a man honoring his marriage vows, honoring his marriage oath to you, okay? And why you want him to respect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? So, a woman who was an escort is not a proper investment. There are women who did that against their will, and those type of young lassies, I guess you could say, they need a lot of therapy, but there's going to be a lot of trauma, and it's a lot of mental work to fix those women. And so men have the duality of, I want to have the look of I want her to look like that, behave like that, but I want her to be pure, and I want her to, they call it the Madonna whore complex, but some of them don't want the average looking girl. They want one who looks like she's high maintenance, and this is where you run into trouble. And your own greed, your own desire to have that, is what's going to lead you into the clutches of the escort. And the escorts, they don't benefit if they really looked at it. Some of them might marry a rich man, and then when she starts to lose her beauty, her position is very precarious, because this man didn't respect marriage in the first place. He didn't respect his soul, he didn't respect his bodily dignity. He knew who you were when he met you, and he's always going to know you like that, no matter how much you change. And so that burden of, he knows who and what you are, and how much you think you changed is never going to be good enough, because, a tiger can't remove its stripes. You can manage behaviors, but certain behaviors might lash out. And escorts have a lot of mental trauma, and it's easy for them to hide it while they're pretty, because men will ignore certain red flags when a woman's beautiful. That benefits women. It's almost like a survival technique. If she's too mean, she's too catty, she's too evil, she's very bitchy, she's combative, she doesn't have true love for you in her heart, she thinks of you as an ATM and could care less if you died because she'd replace you with her 3 other pay pigs, well, that is only something she can do while she has her beauty, okay? So, you investing in a woman who let other men mount her, and she'll never tell you the real number. She would be quite a fool if she did. Just like a man who's smart, he's not going to tell all his financials, like every single detail, to his wife, because then she might want to spend more than what he wants, or she might find out he doesn't have as much as she thought, and then she's going to start planning her exit. An air of mystery is what keeps people going. And the escort will always try to pretend that she hasn't had as many as she has had, and that she hasn't done things that would make your stomach turn. Okay? And if you're thinking that she only is going to accept to do stuff with the most handsome, chiseled men, you're quite wrong. Because a lot of them, they actually have a very deep connection with money itself. You know, in the old American dollars, they've redesigned a couple times, but you could see the spider webs on the corners if you get an old one. I don't know if you've seen it. I still remember them. But the web of money, you know, like the way it networks, it's something that has always had an effect on humans, no matter what type of currency it is. Materialism is a strong bond, and women who will sell their bodies, access to their bodies, and cut off their heart and rebel against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so they can wear clothes of brands. They want to wear brands of owners of these companies that they've never met, because that tells them they have value. They don't think their value comes from being pure and clean and maybe having a more decent, honorable job. They think, no. This pot-bellied, harried guy, you know, let's let him do whatever he wants to me, and I have to do whatever he demands for this money because I want to wear name brands. And when we hear a lot about the cattle, like people are sheep or cattle, and you just think about how when you brand an animal so that when it's stolen, you know it's yours, so they can't argue with you, and it's hard to remove, because back in the day, believe it or not, if somebody swipes half of your sheep herd that you've been working on and protecting, that's gonna cause some starvation and some financial problems, because animal husbandry is definitely a difficult field. But a brand, it has this other dynamic to it, like you're advertising someone else's vision, someone else's idea, and you are a billboard for them. So a woman who wants to be a billboard for companies that overcharge for their products and use sweatshops, because this is where she gets her validation from, is truly twisted. She thinks that her value comes from brands. She's officially retarded and brainwashed. So she's invested her soul into brands. Not, okay, I need to make sure I stay pure and clean and not do all this bad stuff. No, she chose the opposite route. So she has to constantly keep up that facade. Like, oh, I'm a goddess, I'm a queen. They have to have these affirmations that they tell themselves to hide their putridness. They'll say, oh, religious people are so judgmental, so hypocritical. But then if you say, wait a minute, look how you talk about broke men. Look how you talk about women who are fine with being with an average man. You call them Barbara the Builders. You call them Pygmalius. So you judge the average woman, and you say she's settling, and she ain't going for, the gold strike. She's not looking for the gold mine. You insult her, and you insult broke men. You call them incels, you say all these things, but you don't want the religious woman to turn around and say, sorry, I don't agree with your lifestyle. Really examine that. So, be careful, because their trauma sometimes is not something that you can identify right on the surface. Oftentimes, it'll come out in ways you didn't even expect. And it's like Russian roulette. Those women, they will have like one customer. If an escort is telling you she's only had 5 customers and then you believe that, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Who can pay rent working only 5 times? That's not possible. If that's your job, you have to do it every day. You have to do it weekly, okay? And those women are racking it up, and they're not telling you. It's not possible to have a car payment, health insurance, all the bills, and then say, no, I only had 5 customers. Do the math, okay? And she either has to have a bunch of people who pay the average price, lots of people who pay the cheap price, or a handful of men who she visits consistently who pay a high price. You gotta do the math. You gotta look at the numbers, okay? And a lot of them have a way of saying, oh, I work in this industry, I work in that industry. In reality, they only work as doing adult content. And so you have to make sure that you're not actually letting your heart get attached, that you're not allowing your finances to be used, and that you actually work against your nafs and you pick a decent woman who will be a source of goodness for you on Judgment Day. A Jezebel harlot is not going to give you any reward on Judgment Day. That's not anybody. what someone chooses to do to earn money does reflect their ethics. It does reflect how much you can trust them. You can't trust someone who has to shut off parts of their key personality and morph themselves into a guzzling dragon of gold, and to where they don't trust you and they have to cut off into this sort of occultist realm. And some of them are very openly occultist. And I'm sorry, if you're gonna sleep with a cobra and then you think it's not gonna, bite your ankle in the middle of the night, you're a moron. You gotta be smarter, okay? That's why we have hadiths about the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, he left behind this trial, the fitna of women, because it's true. And wicked women who want to see the destruction of men, who don't love their fathers, who don't love their sons, who don't care about their brothers, who don't care about the patriarchy, who don't care about the human race, they will allow women to continue to scan men and do these terrible things. And so, I'm telling you, it's not a safe investment, long term, even short term. They're not going to be something that you should put your money and time into, because someone who has a higher bank account is going to come and swift them away from you, and you'll be sitting there like, wow, all that money lost. And you shouldn't waste money. You shouldn't be a spendthrift. Think about it. Let me know what you think. If you'd like to join my blog and support my work, you can do so by going to www.subscribestar.com/Milahan. Hope to see you there.